Welcome to this online lecture for Western Civ 2. Today we are going to continue our discussion of the French Revolution. As always, there are some terms in the upper left-hand corner of the screen that you should know by the time we get to the last slide of this lecture. Also, there are some questions that you should be able to answer by the time you get to the end as well. So anyway, with that said, let's get to it. Well, let's begin with simply reassessing. Where are we? By the end of the 1780s, France was heading for a crisis. We've discussed this in previous lectures. There was a spiraling debt coupled with food shortages, which raised tensions across the nation. To meet this crisis, the king called for a meeting of the Estates General in 1789. This is the representative body, and it only met at the king's request. In fact, the Estates General had not met since 1614. This meeting would not be the same as past Estates Generals. The Third Estate, inspired by the Enlightenment, rebelled against the elites in French society. The Third Estate declared themselves to be the National Assembly. It alone had the right to govern France because it represented the common people. The National Assembly announced that it would write a new constitution for France based on the principles of the Enlightenment. This act amounted to a revolution against the rule of an absolutist king. Which left one question. What is the king going to do? Is he going to allow the revolution to continue, or will he crack down and restore the old order? While the king was trying to figure out what to do at Versailles, things begin to heat up in Paris. The poorest of the poor are still struggling in Paris. Remember those high food prices. The poor of Paris have been watching events with the National Assembly at Versailles. For the most part, they support the revolution. By July, there is a real fear that the king is planning on sending an army to break up the National Assembly and to end the revolution before it can really begin. On July 12, 1789, tensions boil over when the people of Paris storm the great fortress in the center of the city known as the Bastille. The Bastille was an old storehouse for weapons and gunpowder. The Bastille was also an old prison, notorious for torture and brutality. The mobs killed the guards, cut off their heads, and carried them around the city on long spears. Now, why is this important? The storming of the Bastille is important because it shows that the poor peasants of Paris support the revolution. It also shows that this revolution has two sides. There's the peaceful side that is happening in the National Assembly. This is the revolution that is inspired by the Enlightenment and its ideas of liberty and equality. However, the Bastille shows that there is always a possibility for violence right beneath the surface. It is that possibility that prevents the king from using his army to destroy the National Assembly and the revolution. He fears what might happen if he should provoke the anger of the mob. Now, this is going to buy time for the political revolution that's taking place at Versailles in the National Assembly. In August of 1789, the National Assembly will publish the Declaration of the Rights of Man. The Declaration is similar to the American Declaration of Independence. It is a statement of what the revolution is supposed to be all about. Now, what does it say? Here are just 3 points from the Declaration of the Rights of Man. The first point. Men are born free and remain free and remain equal. Men are born free and remain free and equal in rights. Social distinctions can be based only on public utility. This is a direct attack on the class system within France. Number 2, the aim of every political association is the preservation of the natural and imprescriptible rights of man. These rights are liberty, property, security, and resistance to oppression. You can almost hear John Locke's words, his voice in that passage. The ideas here of liberty, property, and security, not that different from Locke's talk about life, liberty, and property. And of course, number 3, the sources of all sovereignty reside especially in the nation. No body, no individual can exercise authority that does not proceed from it in plain terms. This is clearly an attack on absolutism. Because what we're saying here is, or what they are saying here is that power, sovereignty, the right to rule, does not lie with the king. It lies with the people. As I said, you can hear the ideas of the Enlightenment in these words. Many believe that passage of the Declaration of the Rights of Man is the high point of the revolution. That is partially because things are about to get violent again. Once again, we're going to shift back to Paris. The food crisis continued as Paris grew closer to winter. This concern over food and food prices will lead once again to violent action. In October of 1789, a Paris mob will march on the King and Queen's royal palace at Versailles. Like the storming of the Bastille, this was one of the key moments in the early days of the Revolution. Now let's look at this. This is one of the most famous paintings from the French Revolution. It shows the mob as they are marching to Versailles. Let's look and see what we can see here. What do you notice? First of all, if you look closely at this picture, this is a picture of women. This is a picture of women. And again, that tells you something about this revolution. This is at least the March to Versailles is largely a revolt of the poor peasant women from Paris. These are the people on whom the high bread prices, the high food prices would hit the hardest. You can tell that their social class is peasant largely because of the way they are dressed. Except for the one woman at the very end, over here, right at the very end. She seems to be a noble woman who is being dragged along by the mob, by the crowd. You can also see that these women have armed themselves with medieval weapons. They have spears, they have pikes, they have bayonets, they even have found a cannon somewhere. It's really quite amazing. But anyway, this drawing tells you a lot about who is revolting, or at least who is angry about these food prices. The mob is angry, as I said, because they cannot feed their families. Food is still in short supply, and once they reach Versailles, they demand that the king give them flour. As they wait around for the king to reply, their numbers continue to grow, and they become angrier and angrier. Ultimately, they will break into the palace, and as they rush through the ornate hallways, they make it clear that they want to kill Queen Marie Antoinette. They hate her, remember. Once they reach her bedchambers, they kill her guards, but Marie Antoinette is able to flee to safety. The mob is finally convinced to leave the palace, but only after they have been given flour from the king's personal store. But, this is important to understand, in addition to flour, they get something else as well. The king and his family agree to leave Versailles and move back to Paris. This is a critical victory for the revolution. While the king was living at Versailles, he remained distant from the revolution. He remained free to act as he pleased. In Paris, however, he is going to be surrounded by the mob. His actions are going to be closely scrutinized. Thus, in July of 1790, he has little choice but to accept the new constitution when it is presented to him by the National Assembly. That constitution will radically change France from an absolutist state to a constitutional monarchy. In other words, the king was allowed to keep his job, but his power will now be limited by the Constitution. To rule alongside the king, a new National Assembly would be created. This National Assembly would be elected by the people, and it would have the power to pass laws for the nation. Now let me emphasize something here. This is very different from the Estates General. The Estates General, again, had only met when the king called them into session. Therefore, they were completely at the mercy of the king. This new National Assembly, on the other hand, will be independent of the king. They will be elected by the people, and they will act independently of the king. They will not be under his thumb. Moreover, they will have the power to not just approve laws proposed by the king, but to propose laws themselves. This is a true attack on absolutism. At the same time, the Constitution is going to address the power of the church. Remember Remember that the Catholic Church is the most powerful religious institution in France. Protestants have been persecuted for centuries. Under the Revolution, under the new Constitution, Protestants and Jews in France will be granted religious toleration. Again, another ideal of the Enlightenment. Moreover, the church will be forced to give up its property. Remember, the church is one of the wealthiest institutions within France. It has a great deal of wealth. Most of that wealth is in land and property. They're going to be forced to sell off that land, and the money will be given to the government to help pay off the government's debt. The revolution is trying to solve the problems that faced the old regime. Again, one of the problems was that France was deeply in debt. The revolution has solved that problem. The church is going to sell off land, and that money is going to be used to pay off France's debt. Finally, all priests and church officials will be forced to take an oath of loyalty to the new constitution. Those that refused to take this oath of loyalty will not be allowed to serve. The idea here is that these reforms will ensure that the church will not, should say this, I'm saying this the wrong way. These reforms ensure that the church will become an enemy of the revolution. The church at every step along the way from now on is going to fight to oppose the revolution where it can. Because again, the revolution has greatly weakened the power and the wealth of the church within French society. The church is not going to forget that. So, once the king agreed to the Constitution, which he does, many believe that the French Revolution is over. But is it? In our next lecture, we will explore what happens when France's neighbors decide to get involved in the revolution. Moreover, the people of France are about to discover that King Louis is not the loyal friend of the revolution that he pretends to be. Trust me, things are about to get really ugly.